This is a model of the clipper ship Thermopylae. Thermopylae became quite famous. She was originally built for the tea trade, to carry tea from China back to England. There was a big premium put on getting fresh tea to British markets, so they built fast merchant ships to do this, fast sailing ships. Thermopylae was built in the late 1860s. One of the other famous tea clippers was the Cutty Sark. Now, Thermopylae, I believe, was built of teak on iron frames. I think Cutty Sark was a iron construction. Anyway, those are the two best known names because they would race each other. They would load the fresh cargo of tea in China, and they drop their pilot and off they go, and they'd race each other down, cross the Indian Ocean, around the Cape of Good Hope, and up to England. Now, in those races, Thermopylae prevailed. That was good for about 12 years. By that time, steamships were coming into service. The steamships offered more reliable service, so these fast clippers were no longer being used to carry tea from China, and they then moved into the wool trade from Australia. Again, there was a premium on being able to ship goods in bulk quickly. And Thermopylae, again, both Cutty Sark and Thermopylae were engaged in the wool trade. In the wool trade races, generally Cutty Sark achieved better times. Now, by the 1890s, by the late 1880s, the wool trade too was being taken up being dominated by steamships. So a syndicate of businessmen in Montreal bought her, and she was registered here in Victoria, and as a Victoria registered ship operated for 5 years on the West Coast. Now you can see she's here, this model shows her as a ship, a full rigged ship. And that means she's got 3 masts with yards. She's a square rigger, and you can see that she's got a fore and aft sail on the aftermast. She required a fairly big crew, I think, about 50 men in this configuration. When she was trading out from Victoria, her rig was cut down to that of a barque, B-A-R-Q-E, and that means that the yards on the aftermast were removed, and she just had a square sails on the aftermast. She was then operated by a small crew of 23, and she still achieved some record times. Her fastest passage from here to Hong Kong was in 1893, when she did it in 23 days, which is was it 21 or 23, which is quite phenomenal. So what did she carry in the Pacific? Well, of course, at that time, there were a lot of Chinese laborers in BC. Originally had come for the gold rush, and then were used for building the Canadian Pacific Railway and for other construction jobs, and in many other fields of endeavor. So Thermopylae and rice wasn't really readily available in BC, so Thermopylae would bring cargoes of rice over to provide food for these immigrant laborers. Going back, she would carry lumber out across the Pacific, and there are photographs of her loading over in Vancouver. They cut ports in her bow, and they were able to they would load these squares of timber right through the bow into the hull. After 5 years, I think she was no longer commercially viable, so she was sold to the Portuguese Navy to be used as a training ship, and served in that role for about 12 years. Thermopylae was, in the 70s, there was a lot of interest in Thermopylae in Victoria, and there was a Thermopylae dollar. It was a little coin that you could spend in stores here. Stores would honor the Thermopylae dollar. And there's a group that meets here in the museum, the Thermopylae Club of Old Salts, And they're quite a noteworthy group. They're the ones who really were responsible for bringing the Tillicum out from London to Victoria in the first place, and in subsequently having it restored and placed in the museum. So the Thermopylae Club has a long association with the museum.